Yeah, I mean, you asked before why debt resonates so much with people, and it's because there's been this explosion in credit and indebtedness. And we work with mostly low-income people and people of color in New York City, and what's really plaguing them is abusive debt collection practices. So they're wildly indebted. Over half of households making less than $50,000 now use credit for basic expenses. So to cover, food, medicine, utility bills, and so forth, because we don't have, we've had stagnant wages, we don't have a living wage, people are absolutely struggling. You have one unforeseen, visit to the emergency room and you're just not wiped out financially. And so you have, the fact that people don't have access to affordable health care and insurance and so forth. So we work with people who actually are being pulled into the world of relentlessly, aggressively harassing debt buyers and debt collectors. And anyone who's gotten those phone calls knows that it is a plague, and it's really, really focused on low-income people in our experience.
The debt collection, the debt buying industry has exploded, right? So the idea is, there's someone who can't pay back their debts, and you've tried to extract from them, and you think, you know what, I'm just going to get out of this while I can. I'll sell it to someone at 5 cents on the dollar, and then that person now has an incentive to hound the person to see if they can cut a deal to get 6 cents on the dollar, 7 cents on the dollar, right? Because that's their margin of profit. This is, in 1995, the debt buying industry was at $12 billion. And by 2008, it was up to $215 billion. So there's been an explosion in this. And the average amount owed per debt collection rose from under $900 in 2003 to $1,600 in 2012. So we've seen both a rise in the industry of buying this debt, and we've also seen a rise in the amount that people owe. Doug, you've written, I think, sort of both affectionately and critically about what strike debt is doing. And one of the points you've made is, look, debt in and of itself plays a very important role. And you say, well, debt is entrapping or something. But, if you take out debt and you get a good education and that's a good investment in building up your skills and then you can pay it off, there's certain debt that debt in and of itself is not bad and actually plays a really vital role.
Yeah, well, I noticed that chart you had, the private debt to GDP ratio, falls off at the end. And what we've been going through for the last few years is people have been deleveraging. That's why the economy is so stagnant. The economy is very dependent on high levels of debt to keep going. And
explain what deleveraging is.
Just people paying off debt, not paying debt, not taking out new debt.
Getting rid of the amount they owe.
Getting down the debt to income ratio.
Right.
And we've been going through that for 4 or 5 years. A lot of countries around the world have been doing something very similar, but we're actually further along than just about anybody else is. And then, debt, I think, is also a symptom. I mean, if we go back to the late 70s, early 80s, when we first saw the Volcker-Reagan crackdown, the end of inflation of the 70s, a real assault on the living standards of the working class, union busting, all that, all the outsourcing, everything has become familiar since. We have an economy that's very dependent on mass purchasing power, and if people's wages and living standards are under attack, how do you sustain the mass purchasing power? It's through borrowing, and most of the borrowing has come through mortgages, directly or indirectly. So the macroeconomy has become very dependent on that. But the number of people who are really seriously debt distressed, it's a minority of the population. It's a suffering minority, and I don't want to minimize their suffering, but it's 10-15% of the population. But it's also a symptom of something that's much larger, is the real stress on living standards, the stress on incomes, the inability of people to make ends meet. So if we're talking specific medical debt, we have a crazy healthcare finance system, education debt. Education should be free.
I want to talk about what produces this debt and also get into the nitty-gritty of how you're going to forgive it right after we take a break.